Well, firstly, I'd like to say thank you for the warmth of that welcome. For me, as many of you will know, this feels very much like coming home. I am indeed a child of the Caribbean, born in the most beautiful but perfectly formed island of Dominica. "365 rivers, one for every day." And it is said that it is the only island in the Caribbean Sea that Columbus would still recognize, because nothing has changed. I hope many of those students will be lawyers. I don't know whether any of them are here, and whether they could indicate to me how many of you are potential lawyers. Thank God, I have 4 women on the right. I just want to say to you ladies in particular, having been the first female Attorney General in the United Kingdom in 700 years, I really don't want to be the last. But I am particularly pleased to be able to talk to you about a subject which is of growing importance, and proud, therefore, that I have been chosen to be the second of the 3 speakers that will be addressing the very important and now internationally recognized problem of corruption. As I say, it's always a particular delight for me to come to the Caribbean. But this is an issue which is affecting not just this region, but every region across the world. And corruption is something, therefore, which, in my view, is absolutely everyone's business. Security is now high amongst the priorities for most investors. The impact on public procurement has been less dramatic, and public international bodies are still able to invest globally. But the international funder organizations, that's the UNDP, the Council of Europe, the European Union, the African Union, the Aid to African Development Bank, the World Bank, all now require a high standard of probity from the countries they invest in. The international tax system has struggled to keep up. The loopholes in the system are now being exploited by many large corporations, which is causing consternation across the world. licensing agreements whereby corporations create a subsidiary in a low-tax jurisdiction, which then licenses back the brand to the parent company for a small fee, have been used as a means of limiting company tax liabilities. And countries face increasing problems from below in meeting the needs of their populations, primarily using tax revenues and pressures from above in having to attract investment from multinationals. And the two pressures are interdependent, but do not sit happily together. Many of you will know that my own party, the Labour Party, has made clear its commitment to international corporate transparency. Even now, there are discussions as to whether we should consider making all multinational corporations operating in the United Kingdom to publish details of any tax schemes they may be using globally, and also to publish information about the ownership of companies situated in the territories, which can then be assessed by HMRC in the UK. And an imperative for international fund organizations is that the money they invest is not frittered away by corruption. There's an increasing awareness of the global impact of corruption. The World Bank has estimated that $1 trillion are paid in bribes each year, and that corruption drags economic growth figures down by between 0.5 and 1%. And in addition, the World Bank estimates that between 20 and 40% of the official development assistance is simply lost in corruption. The new challenges are all too real. Not least of them is corruption. Internationally, corruption can take many forms, but its consequence, wherever it arises, always appears to be the same. It creates division and undermines confidence in the public. It is present when the rule of law is absent, and in every democracy, it has to be eradicated, because failure to do so brings about real destruction of the citizens' quality of life, their sense of fairness, parity of treatment, belief in justice, and undermines community, sometimes, as in the case of the Arab Spring countries, fatally. Every instrument available needs to be used to combat it, and aggressively. It is everyone's business and should never be seen nor left as the preserve of the political or institutional elite. No matter how gifted, fiscally competent, or well-intentioned, creating a culture which is resistant to bribery and corruption needs a multi-layered and multidisciplinary approach where every participant understands the impact of their acceptance or toleration of the corrupt practices of those who may surround them, and that silence is collusion. It's a hard message, and one which is often unpalatable to many who, innocent themselves of poor practice, would rather look the other way because challenge and confrontation is too difficult. To contemplate. So I think I should make plain straight away that an anti-corruption commission, no matter how well structured and able, cannot be and should never be seen as a panacea. Such commissions should rather be seen as potential instruments or vehicles for targeted change and scrutiny, but only as part of the tapestry of things which need to be in place if good governance is to prevail and corruption addressed and hopefully prevented. And with their voices. And actually, if we want change, then I believe that Gandhi was right. We have to be the change we want to see in the world. And it has to start with each of us. I think so many of us wait around for someone to do something. Someone has to start. Well, I was always brought up to believe that it has to start with me. I have to walk, and I hope that others will walk with me. And I always remember Rosa Parks, because if you can think back to what the southern states of America were like, here was a poor, not well-educated, black, middle-aged woman who everybody said had no power. And the day she was asked to go to the buck of the bus, basically, forgive me, she said, hell no. Hell no. I will never get on your bus again. And she started to walk, and she walked on her own. But look around. Within a very short time, others walked with her. And she created a tsunami which changed the face of America, and we now have a black man in the White House. We need to understand that corruption eats away at the very fabric of our societies. All of us now are living in a world where geographical location is no longer the determining factor of our future. And therefore, each country needs to exploit the talents of every single member of their community if they are to survive and thrive. So, for example, that means you cannot ignore the talent of 50% of your population who happens to be female. Because if you do that, you deprive yourself of an opportunity of real richness. So I do think that we each are contributors to the communities in which we live. And if we see things which we don't like, then start to think, how can I change that? What can I do? Instead of saying, why doesn't someone do this for me? I think the change starts with us. In the final analysis, go to the court for the court to determine. And I know from talking to many investors across the world that one of the things that they value most highly about the United Kingdom and most highly about the overseas territories is the high quality of your judiciary. And the judiciary are seen in this jurisdiction as some of the very best. And indeed, one of the benefits that the Cayman and a number of other overseas territories have is you don't only have homegrown, wonderful Caribbean judges, but you have been able to benefit too from the judges who are have previously been resident in the United Kingdom, have previously been some of our highest judges in our country, in the UK, who now come to assist in the judiciary here. And I am very delighted that two of the luminaries from the bench are sitting right there in front of me.
Before I ask my question, I would just like to say that on behalf of the PBM-led administration, that we are committed to fighting against corruption and giving the support that is necessary for that. I think I'm safe to say that about myself and my colleagues. But the question was, would you say that public prosecution and attention to those involved in corruption is also a key tool to fighting against corruption? If so, how? And please give examples of this in other anti-corruption regulation legislation.
Well, as I've said, the most effective way of addressing those who are involved in criminal activity or corruption is through detection, prosecution, and then successful application for asset recovery. The Proceeds of Crime Act in our country has been very successful. It enables prosecutors to work in collaboration with their international interlocutors, collecting evidence from wherever it can be culled in order to bring criminals and those who engage in corruption to book. That's why when I was talking about the tools, I think you can't just look at the anti-corruption commissions. You have to look at what are we doing to educate business to participate in the detection of crime, particularly fraud, particularly corrupt practices. How are we skilling our prosecutors and training them so they have the acuity and judgment to make the assessment as to whether the acts complained of are legitimate or unlawful? Do we have sufficiently highly skilled, highly trained members of the judiciary who are able to adjudicate successfully and fairly upon those matters when they come before the court? Can assets which have been improperly and illegally acquired be therefore withdrawn and withheld from the criminal fraternity? All those issues are important. If you look at the criminal, there are two things that the criminal fears most. One is detection, because if they feel the likelihood of them being detected is remote, then they will feel comfortable in continuing with their corrupt acts and their illegal activity. The second is the assets that they acquire as a result of the corrupt or illegal activity. And it is also status. So if you are able to increase the likelihood of interdiction, which is going to lead to prosecution and conviction, and you then relieve them, as I said earlier, of the burden of their weighty assets, you make it possible that they do the risk assessment for themselves and end up thinking this crime simply isn't worth it. Firstly, I go through all the effort to do it. Secondly, I acquire all this stuff. And thirdly, they strip me of it and send me to prison. Those odds are not odds the criminal likes. But I do think that prosecutors have to do what we are now doing, and that is working together internationally. You have Europol, Eurojust, FATA, all these international groups now able to share information in a way that makes interdiction internationally and globally more possible than it was in the past. Unfortunately, crime is no longer local, it's no longer regional, it's no longer international. The norm now is for criminals to act globally, and that's why it takes all of us working together to fight them. I've said in the past that they have the conspiracy of the criminal. We now need to create our own conspiracy, but it's the conspiracy of the just. And we need to be a jolly sight better than they are.